So the plan today was to go into the forest and finish milling the windfall cedar. But the weather is absolutely terrible. It's lashing with rain and hail coming down. So instead, I decided to do a few jobs in the workshop. As you may remember, then I decided to use an old aluminium ladder as a guide rail for my Alaskan chainsaw mill. Of course, I could have bought the proprietary Granberg Alaskan Chainsaw mill guide rails, but this would cost several $100s. And if I just use this old ladder, then it's a lot cheaper. Now, I have to say that I'm very pleased with this setup. I don't think there's any need for me to spend hundreds of dollars to buy a special set of rails when this old ladder does just as well. There's only one thing that I'm slightly disappointed in, and that's the lag screws I used in order to level the ladder along the log. To start off with, these 4-inch lag screws are far too small, and so they're not strong enough to support the ladder. They tend to bend. And also, in order to adjust them, then I have to get underneath the ladder and adjust them with a spanner. There's no way to get a larger tool in or to use an electric drill. So really what I need is to have bolts put in through the top of the ladder that I can use with the electric drill and a socket, and I can adjust them to go up and down. So I bought some T-nuts. The T-nuts insert into the wooden cross members on the ladder, and that means I can put bolts through. Now I looked for bolts that were threaded all the way down because I need to be able to adjust them up and down the full length of the bolt. But the only ones I could find were either A2 stainless steel, and they're really expensive. They're about $8 each Canadian, or galvanized. Now, galvanized are still about $3 each, but the problem with the galvanized bolts is that they have been coated, and so they don't fit into the T-nuts very well. They're a bit tight. So what I want is something that's very easy. In the end, then I decided to buy a bit of threaded bar, and the entire 4-foot length of threaded bar is only $7. It's the same cost as one stainless steel bolt. Now, of course, it's not as strong as the stainless steel. I'm still hoping that they'll be much stronger than these small lag screws. The threaded bar is only zinc coated, so in the end, if it's too soft, then I'll just have to go on Amazon and find some cheap stainless steel bolts. What I need to do is to add 2 nuts to the top that are locked together, and I'll use these to screw down the bar. So the first thing I have to do is remove these old lag screws, and then taking a 1/2-inch bayonet bit is to drill out the holes in the wooden cross members so that I can insert the T-nuts. Once the T-nuts have been inserted, then the next thing for me to do is to cut some lengths of threaded bar. The original lag screws were 4 inches. Now I need an extra inch to go through the top, and also I'm going to add another 1/2 inch onto that. And so I need to cut these bars into lengths of 5.5 inches. When you cut a piece of threaded bar with an angle grinder, then it's quite likely that you will damage the end of the thread. So it's worthwhile threading a nut onto the bar before you cut it. That means that you can use the nut to clean the end of the thread, and that will make your assembly a lot easier. Once I've cut all the pieces of threaded bar, the next thing to do is to insert 2 nuts and a lock washer on the end. I'm clamping the bottom nut into the bench vise, then tightening the top nut onto the lock washer. Once that's all nice and tight, then I'm going to hammer down the end of the bar. Then this will prevent the nuts from slipping off the end of the threaded bar. Once the T-nuts have been inserted into the wooden cross members on the ladder, and I've finished my 8 handmade threaded bolts, then the next thing I need is a socket driver. Now the standard socket drivers that come with roofing screws are too small. Now I've got 2 3/8-inch extension bars for my socket driver, and so I took one of them and I cut off the end so that it could fit into the end of the drill. So once I've got an appropriate size socket attached to the end of the electric drill, then it's a simple matter of using forward and reverse on the drill to adjust the height of the ladder. Now this is going to save an awful lot of time when it comes to setting the rail on top of a log. As you saw in the previous video, then if I adjust it from underneath by hand, it takes a lot of time. It's quite finicky. But using this method, Then I can very quickly adjust the nuts up and down to accommodate the differences in the diameter of the tree. Now tomorrow I'm going to set the guide rails onto a log, and I'm going to test and see how easy it is to adjust the height and to fasten down the ladder to the top of the log. But my intuition is that this is going to be a lot easier than trying to adjust them from underneath by hand. Also, the threaded bar is a much greater diameter than the standard 4-inch lag screws. And considering that this was an old ladder lying around the property when I got the place, then basically I've got a set of guide rails for free. So for now, thank you for listening, and see you next time.